Welcome to the Responsible Marketing Podcast, conversations about marketing, sustainability, and how we can all help in becoming more responsible organisations. I'm Jo, a marketing strategist and consultant with a career spanning corporate, small medium business, and self-employment, incorporating marketing and commercial skills in various guises, and now flying the flag for a more sustainable and kind future for all. And today, it's me in the hot seat. I feel so proud of how this podcast has been received and want to say a big thank you to my lovely listeners and YouTube watchers for all your support. So I thought I'd complete season 2 with a bit of a roundup of why I started the podcast in the first place, what I hope it will give back, and some super easy tips to start your own organisation's journey into becoming more responsible and how it can be used for truly impactful marketing. Let's get going then. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I thought it might be interesting to just have a little review of what I've learned over the last 2 seasons of recording the Responsible Marketing Podcast, and maybe share a little bit about why I started the podcast in the first place. So I put myself in the hot seat today. We'll see how we go. So the reason I started the podcast, about 2.5 years ago, I think it must have been, I was very lucky to be entered on a mentorship program through Newcastle Business School, and I was paired up with Stephen King, who is an amazing mentor, by the way, and has an incredible career. And we were talking, and he was kind of saying to me, what do you want to be your business and where you want to go with it? And I got to the point where I wasn't really sure. So I've always had a bit of a lean towards kind of recycling and sustainable activity and looking after the planet and wildlife and things like that. But for me, it almost sat really quite comfortably with my own industry in marketing. And I was having a little bit of a struggle in my head with regards to that and trying to work out how we could move marketing away from kind of consumerism, so pushing that kind of sell, and sell, dispose of, rebuy, all that kind of circular, well, not really circular, is it? It's like end of the line and then just buy it again and start all over again. So great for kind of like sales and I suppose earning money, but not really great when you look at the whole scheme of the planet, making people spend money on things that perhaps they don't need, all that kind of stuff. So I got to the point where I was a bit like, I don't know what to do. And I'm really at the end of my tether as to how we change the narrative on that. And I said to Stephen in one of our calls, and I was slightly flippant, but there's always a little bit of underlying truth in it, that I wanted to basically pack my bags and go and strap myself to a ship or something like that in a protest to my industry and what the world was doing. And Stephen quite rightly said that probably wasn't a great idea with 2 kids at home, and I didn't think my husband would be very pleased when he got home about me missing. But that's kind of where I got to. So so Stephen kind of made me rethink that, obviously, quite rightly, and said, what else could you do rather than doing something so extreme? And really, for me, it's about kind of education and communication about sustainability, responsible business practice, best business practice, changing my industry as far as I'm able to, as one small voice in a very big sea of marketers. But also kind of educating other industries to perhaps look at responsibility and sustainability, or ESG, however you want to portray that. So really, that's why the podcast happened, because for me, it's another way to not only embrace kind of the message that I want to put out, so about kind of like embracing sustainability practice, or again, making your workplace more, your organization more responsible in terms of looking at how it delivers positive impact on the planet, how it deals with people, whether that's their internal people that work for them, whether that's external communities, societies that are around the site, perhaps that's worked on or whatever. And then also how the business is run. So the policies that are included in that. So is it inclusive? Is it diversive? Are there policies that do protect people that work in the workforce, that protect the resources, how people buy, how they sell, all that kind of stuff. So really, that's kind of like where it started from. And to start with, I think I was a little bit nervous about whether it would be successful or not, and whether people would be interested or not in listening. So I started with a lot of Northeast-based businesses, some of which I knew very, very well already. So I knew that there would be a thread in there and relevance. And now, yeah, I'm finding that I've had a few inquiries that are cold inquiries for me, which is amazing because it means the podcast is really getting out there. People are listening. There's clearly an appetite for this kind of information. So I'm going to keep on doing it for a little bit until perhaps people drop off. But I'm super, super proud of where the podcast is now. I mean, we're not setting the world alight with loads of sponsors, but if you fancy sponsoring the podcast, please do let me know, because that's always a great way as well to get greater exposure and more people listening or watching on YouTube. So so if you fancy sponsoring the podcast, then please do let me know. And I'm really excited for the guests I've already got lined up for season 3. I have just started recording season 3, but I'm not sure when it's going to go out yet. So this is the final episode of season 2. So just subscribe to the channel and you will get notification of when the next episode drops straight into your inbox or your podcast audio channels, wherever you listen or watch. And for me, it was really important that the podcast wasn't just kind of like a bit of a, I don't know, banging on about carbon emissions and climate change and things like that, which are really important, by the way. That's not taking that away from it. But it's really important for me to make sure people understood the wider aspect of that, because although measuring carbon emissions is really important and a really easy way of understanding where you are on kind of like climate impact, I guess, of output and manufacturing, for example, or even how you work day to day. So even in my own little office here in my home, I've done my own little carbon emissions tracker, and I can see where I can try and make some progress and improvements on that to reduce my emissions. But it's not just about that side, it's the much wider picture. And I think that's what I'm trying to convey by interviewing other businesses or having them guesting on the podcast, other organizations that really can tell good stories about what they're doing in their own organizations to address not just the environment, but also people. So whether that's communities or workforce or workplace, as well as philanthropic behavior. That's not always an easy word to say, is it? Philanthropic. Anyway, there we go. Said it twice now. Hopefully that's that. And yeah, so just looking at the wider picture. So all those elements, those kind of like extra pillars, if you like, that underpin ESG from a regulatory type aspect, or sustainability or responsibility, however you want to, again, look at that. But it's about considering all of those aspects. That's really great for me as a marketer, because then I can see that there's a much wider bank of stories that organizations can use to boost their brand presence and brand reputation and really kind of drive behind those values and purpose of the business. That's why it's been set up. And I really wanted to give a way to be able to champion those businesses that are already in this kind of space, but perhaps either don't realize it or certainly aren't very forward in talking about it, and understand the reasons why, because that's also another factor of this. But I'll come on to that in a little while. So really, it's about championing those businesses that are really connected with their internal and external communities as well. And even by just using the podcast as a bit of a tool to educate and inform, like I said before, then that also helps me convey kind of like where I stand with this subject matter and where others stand with me on that, in communicating and just telling the world really why it's important, why we consider this, what makes us amazing businesses to work with. And I think that's really important. I also wanted the podcast to be a really easy way to bring industries together and understand that across industries all this kind of business practice is happening, and also to understand what really responsibility means, because I've called the podcast the Responsible Marketing Podcast, but what does that actually mean? Does it mean that I'm being responsible in my marketing? Does it mean that other people are being responsible in their marketing? Does it mean how we're going to? And it means actually for me all of that. So any kind of tips that people give out when they're guesting on the podcast, whether it's business practices, whether it's things they've heard, whether it's market trends, whether it's what consumers want to hear. So some of my guests, have talked about actually what consumers want to hear from businesses and organizations in their marketing. So even that aspect for me is really, really vital in bringing this all together in how, in educating and helping businesses, supporting organizations become more responsible, but also communicating that without any fear, without any horror stories of greenwashing or blue rinsing, or, for me, green hushing, so not talking about the good practice and the good stories that you guys as organizations are doing, is almost as bad. You know, you need to be telling these good stories, but also, and what's been really interesting recently coming out, is telling the stories that perhaps aren't as good. So stories that perhaps don't deliver the results that were anticipated, or certainly for community projects and things like that and social impact. You know, those are really good learning curves as well for organizations and individuals. If there's a case where a community project has been brought together, perhaps between the private sector and a charity, and it hasn't worked for whatever reason, then even educating people on that to understand why it didn't work and what needs to happen next time to make that project work better is also really important. So far on the podcast, we've covered some of the services that organizations that have guested on the podcast offer, whether that's 3D imagery, for example, or rewilding projects that are going on to really enhance their own kind of like carbon emission work or sustainable practice work. We've also talked about the importance of values, of purpose, of transparency and authenticity, and that's absolutely key. Being transparent and being honest and open about what you're doing. It's not necessarily saying we're going to be net zero in 2050. This is about the journey to that, to help people understand that it is quite a tough path to follow, but it is doable and it's small steps. And what other ideas people have to start those processes or keep that progress going. But then also how we talk about it with transparency, like I say, and honesty, because that is really the key. And that's the, you know, the way to get around any of this fear of greenwashing, blue rinsing and all that kind of stuff. And the only way to do that is evidence. So if you can prove what you're doing, then you know you're in a clear path. You can explain to people what you're doing, and it's all about a journey. It's not about saying we're here now and then that's it. This is all going to be a journey. And I said to somebody a few weeks ago, we don't even know really where this is going yet. We've got some aims and there are some big objectives, like councils and government have got objectives and local industry will have objectives and things like that. But we don't really know where it's going. So the more we can explain that this is our plan and this is the progress, and then demonstrate that progress going on with the evidence behind that, to offer the transparency that we need to really get people to trust that what we're doing is valid and honest, then that's how, again, you can demonstrate that and build your brand reputation using sustainable practices. And this whole fear about talking about it, I found really fascinating because I hadn't really clocked that was such a major barrier. But most of the business I've talked to have said either, oh, yes, we should talk about that a bit more, or, yeah, we don't talk about it because we're a bit worried about, you know, how our industry is perceived, or if somebody suddenly then says, well, yes, you might be doing this, but you're not doing that. So again, that goes back to kind of like evidencing what you're doing, being really, really thorough about your organization. So if you're going to step into this kind of a sustainable space, it's going to be step by step. It's not going to be everything's done straight away anyway. And I do get it. You know, the fear of this greenwashing is real completely. And it might be that, you know, you're starting on this journey and you're looking into your supply chain and you find some elements that perhaps aren't as clear or as responsible perhaps as you would like. But that's part of it. That's where your collaboration and your project work comes in with your supply chain, for them to, for you to communicate why you want to do this and why it's required. Because until we're legislated on it as small, medium businesses, which we're not right now, but that will come in the next probably 2 to 3 years, you know, there's no real stick telling us we have to do this, but it's a good thing to do. It's a good business thing to do. And so for you to communicate that to people when they're asking why you need this information, for example, or why you want to change raw materials, or can we look for something else and do it as a project work, that's really, really important for people, for other people down the supply chain to understand why you're wanting to do it for a start. But then also allows you to communicate that this is the project we've got in place, that this is who we're working with, this is why we're doing it, this is what our end result's going to be, but it might take some time. And these are the small baby steps of achievements that we're actually getting to. So it might be looking at different packaging, for example, but there's nothing on the planet right now that offers the same, I don't know, the same kind of like protection and value to your product that delivers the expectation that your consumer wants or expects to have. And so therefore going to certain types of packaging might actually be detrimental to your product in the end, which you don't want to do either, because that damages your brand as well. So it's a case of communicating, well, yes, we're on this pathway to this end goal, and this is part of the project. This is part of one element, but we're doing all these other good things as well. or we're going to look at this next. And one of the easiest ways to start off that kind of journey of where you are on this sustainability roadmap, if you like, is to look at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, which is available on the internet. There's 17 of them. They're really great. They're super easy just to have a look at and see which spaces you're already working in from those goals. So it might be you're addressing no poverty. It might be you're addressing water usage. It might be you're addressing carbon emissions, whatever that might be. You're already working in those spaces, and those are the good stories that you can tell already, providing you've got that evidence. So it's about kind of collecting that evidence, that data, providing that as stories and using that in your marketing, obviously. And then by using that evidence and demonstrating to the world that's kind of where you are and this is the impact you've had, then that takes that fear away, because the evidence is there. So if people come and question what you're doing, again, providing you're looking at all aspects of your business and not using it just for one to champion your business, saying you're really, really great at this and this is where we are. We've got no emissions whatsoever, but actually one of your resource materials comes from somewhere that really isn't great from a sustainable point of view or responsible sourcing point of view, then that's really where that kind of almost two sides of the business comes in, and that's where it gets a bit grey and dirty, and that's where people will start pulling you for. So it's making sure that you're looking at the wider picture throughout the whole business, not just honing in on one bit and saying, yeah, we're champions of this, which is great, and all stories are good stories, by the way, for this kind of area, but let's also look at the other elements of the business and make sure we're all conjoined on that as well. And another way to evidence this kind of work and protect your reputation and I suppose contain the risk management of walking into sustainability and using that as communicated marketing material is to look at accreditation. So recognize accreditations, whether by consumers or industries. So B Corp is one, for example. Although interestingly enough, B Corp has had a bit of backlash recently, and I did ask one of my guests about this very, very recently. And because B Corp has expanded, I think it started for kind of small, medium businesses, and now has expanded to incorporating larger businesses within the accreditation status as well. And it's quite a rigorous thing to go through to get B Corp status, and you have to maintain it, obviously. It's not really costly, but it's quite costly. And there's a lot of information you have to provide, and also you have to demonstrate positive progress over the years, or each year when you're audited. So it's a really amazing stamp to have on your brands. But that's quite hard to monitor then when you're looking at really large businesses or corporates. Having said that, those much larger corporate type businesses are probably already reporting or will be reporting on certain legislative things anyway. So things like carbon emissions, for example. And so that is one of the ways that they can be traced and verified as to whether they're actually doing as what they say they're doing and claiming to do. So yeah, there's been a bit of backlash as to whether B Corp has moved their kind of goalposts, if you like, because they're now incorporating big corporates. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, won't we? But hopefully, like I say, that they are being, as any business would be, audited and checked on that they're carrying out the practices they're saying they are. Hopefully, I'm sure B Corp are doing that as well. But yeah, it's quite an interesting aspect. But anyway, B Corp is one really great accreditation, although not as well known as I thought it would be. Maybe when you're working in this kind of space, it's one of those very, very well-known accreditations, but certainly one to look out for if you're looking for responsible brands or business partners to work with. And then another one that I'm part of is the Good Business Charter, which is probably a bit lesser known than B Corp, I would guess, but equally there are 10 standards that you have to adhere to and demonstrate that you're already practicing in those areas. And again, that could be something like dealing with your suppliers in a really humane way, basically making sure your invoices are paid on time and things like that. So it's really, again, a good business practice. It's just a way of demonstrating that's kind of what you're part of. And I've actually gained Good Business Charter status as well. So, for me, that's a dead easy way for a really small business to get on board and prove that that's what they're committed to and that's what they're really interested in. So another barrier that comes up quite a lot is cost. So, business is tough. Business is tough generally, but I think the past probably 5 years since the dreaded, I don't want to say the word, but the thing that happened, the thing that won't be spoken about. Since then, business has been more tough for various reasons. It's not just because I think the backlash of that. I think it's just been a lot of change. So changing governments in the UK, for example, legislation that's come in, putting added cost pressures on businesses. And I think that's been really tough. So for me right now, a lot of businesses are talking about just keeping heads above water. We just need to keep the day to day. We just need to be able to pay our staff, that kind of thing, which is totally, acceptable and absolutely valid, by the way. But for me, part of two things for me on this. One is that sustainability or responsible business practice will bring kind of like organizational longevity and also options to, for example, capture cost savings, long-term cost savings, but also build brand presence, brand reputation, and therefore drive kind of like consumer loyalty and therefore sales, etc. And so that goes on. But also, sustainable business practice or good business practice doesn't have to be costly. We're not talking about, one day going from a little shack somewhere or a small manufacturing site, for example, production site, to a brand new site, which is all climate controlled and solar panels and, I don't know, water recycling and amazing sourcing of materials from the best possible places. It's not really about that. This is about a journey. This is about progress. It's about baby steps. It's not about, crippling your business with added cost now when it's already perhaps a difficult financial time. It's about making sure that those steps are in place for the long term and making sure that they deliver financially for the business. And when I first started talking about sustainability really seriously within business, I was really quite nervous and reluctant to talk about financial gain with regards to this because, again, I guess going back to marketing and consumerism, I don't want it to be seen as, this is a way to make business out of you. Sorry, this is a way to make money out of your business. But actually, ultimately, it is because it's really important for your businesses to be delivering profits and then reinvesting, whether that's in people or machinery or product or even getting better sourcing materials or whatever that might be. It's really important for those financial deliverables to happen as well. So again, like I say, sustainability doesn't have to be expensive. It can be really small things. And most of the time, businesses or organizations are already doing practices or making good stories that they can talk about. And it's just about, again, getting that evidence to be transparent, authentic, and be able to really well demonstrate really well. That would be a better way to put it, wouldn't it? Demonstrate really well that they're actually doing this work and the evidence is there that they've got this positive impact, whether that, again, is on environmental point of view, whether that's philanthropic, whether it's community, whether it's workplace, whatever that might be. And no one's saying this is easy, by the way, either. So this is not, otherwise everyone would be doing it already, right? And I think that's why maybe some companies have entered into this to tick the boxes and said, yeah, we're doing this, it's dead easy, sorted. Well, it's not. It's really not. And you have to be really serious about it. It has to be on your main business agenda with your main objectives for the business. It has to be ingrained in the business values and its purpose as well to become more responsible or more sustainable or whatever that kind of language is for your business or organization. That's what you need to embrace. And it has to be through the bloodline of the business. And also filtered through, we talked about community, but that's internal community. So that's to do with internal communications as well. So telling your employees and your workforce, this is what we're doing, this is what the aim is, this is why we're doing it, these are the practices we're putting in place. Please, also engage with that. Tell us what you think, bring us your ideas. Because also, can you imagine the impact of your whole organization getting involved in this and then your employees going home and taking that home as well? It's like double whammy. It's amazing. So imagine the positive impact you're then having on the world in whatever aspect you're looking at. So there is a case for, talking maybe industry to industry about, real financial gains and financial benefits that this kind of business practice is happening. Because again, that's how you can educate your own industry colleagues or cross industries on the benefits of doing this and embracing it themselves. And, as always, the more we can get people together doing this together, the greater impact it's going to have overall. And quite frankly, I've come to the attitude that we shouldn't not talk about the money. It's a really important part. We talk about people, planet, and profit. Profit is a really, really important part of this. And I think, and I agree with some of the guests that I've had on recently, that talking about that kind of economic or capitalism type gain of embracing business practice is actually really important as well. So yes, maybe capitalism is a bit of a dirty word right now, but without that kind of like financial without those financial deliverables, then we wouldn't have businesses, we wouldn't have economic infrastructure, we wouldn't be the world that we are, which is not always good, but it's not always bad either. So, it's finding ways to embrace those exceptional business practices again, to make sure that an organization is delivering on all of those pillars, making the wide picture, not just one. So thinking about those kind of like financial gains, it's not just about profit necessarily. Like I say, it could be organizational longevity. So it just means that you have a business to leave behind when you retire or whatever, you sell it on. But there's also things like the long-term cost savings that can be gained within either, again, supply chain partnerships and project groups. It might be new markets that you go to, or new streams of consumers, so new revenue streams coming into the business. It might be efficiencies. You might find cost-saving efficiencies in there. And it might also be investment opportunities, because there is a thing now, there's not just the legislation that larger companies have to report on now, but there's also the fact that investors, so British Bank, for example, they released some reports quite recently regarding investment and things like that. And there are big investment companies and funders looking for this type of information and this type of proof. So it's not just about information, yes, we're going to do this. It's about, we've been doing this. This is the evidence. This is the proof we've been doing it. And this is the impact we've had. And that will put you way ahead of any competition on that as well, which I think is a really, really amazing thing. Because if you're looking for, whether it's angel investment, whether it's private investment, whether it's funding, whatever that is, for you to be ahead of the game, the funding money isn't out there like it used to be, for sure. And so if you can make sure you're ahead in that queue and really stand out because of these business practices, then that's got to be a great advantage. And I'm going to be a bit naughty now and call out some of those investors and funders and just say, do you know what you're really looking for when you ask for this kind of information? So there's a lot of talk, especially with funding at the moment, about social impact, which currently is really, really difficult to measure. Because you're trying to demonstrate the impact you've had on a community or an environmental community by a habitat kind of thing, without actual like really tangible data, like numbers. Like numbers are really easy a way to kind of demonstrate impact and to establish patterns and trends and things like that. But when you don't have that really tangible data, it's really difficult. So when it's like people's emotions, it's more qualitative data. It's really difficult to then describe or prove the more positive impact you've had because of the work you've been doing. So one of the easiest ways perhaps is to get the communities, the social communities you've been working with, and for them to record on video what you've done and how that's impacted and what benefits it's brought them directly, because then you've got that valid proof there and it's right in front of people. You can't deny if it's somebody talking about that on video. But other ways are really difficult. So there is work going on how to calculate social impact, if you like, but it's really difficult. But it's also understanding what those investors and what those funders really want to know about. So are they wanting to know about social impact data? Are they wanting to know what kind of projects you're involved in, or how much time that you're delivering, or how many people you've influenced? So perhaps, for a business like me, for example, my time is probably my biggest attribute that I can give for social impact. And so maybe it's a case of me gauging how many young adults perhaps I've looked to educate on marketing skills and what they've then gone away and done. So the proof would be how they've actually taken those skills and gone and improved either their business or launched a business or whatever else that might be. But it's a long process. But it's probably the only way I can do that right now. So it's a case of understanding exactly what your investors and funders are looking for in terms of social impact, or community impact, or social values is another way that sometimes it's described as. So it's really understanding, and you're well within your rights to go back to those investors and funders and ask them, like, what are you actually looking for here? What are you wanting us to describe in terms of social value? What do you term as social value? And also making sure that they're also following their own policies. So where they have, requirements for ESG, environmental, social, and governance requirements, are they also demonstrating the same themselves? So interrogate them, look at their policies that they've got on their website, ask how they're doing that themselves. Is it job creation, or is it that, whatever those questions are, but really use that as a platform to be able to ask them, because they also need to prove themselves. So I guess that's covered kind of like why I started the podcast, what I want to achieve, a bit about kind of why sustainable business practice, or ESG, is valuable to embrace and really take into your business or organization. So maybe just to finish off, my tips on how to get started on a kind of like roadmap, if you like, is probably look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals that I mentioned, have a look at those and see which areas you're already working, which space you're already working in, and where you can demonstrate that, and what stories, marketing stories you can make from those, and start communicating that straight away with your evidence. Then maybe assess what other measures you could put in place. So is it carbon emissions? Is it water usage? Is it utilities? Because again, those are really easy, and there's loads of things, loads of tools on the websites, on the internet, that you can use to start that progress, to work out like what usage you are having, and also compare them to the rest of your industry as well, which is really useful to see if you're better or worse, or in the middle of your industry as an average. Talk to your supply chain, talk to your suppliers, talk to your customers, talk to your clients, talk to your investors, your funders, whoever that is. Talk to your local governments and understand what they're wanting to achieve as well. Because if you can understand their goals, then you can see where you can contribute. And it becomes, again, a really good collaboration, a really amazing story to talk about. And again, the evidence is there because you're helping them contribute to their own goals. Get involved in your community, whether that's in your social community, whether it's inter-communities, whatever that is, but really engage with them and be authentic and transparent about how you communicate that as well. Measure anything you can, basically measure, because again, until there are ways to really record impact without it being data, then use the data. So whether that is, how many materials you source from responsible sources, or whether that is the community impact that you've had, whether that's community engagement for an internal point of view, whatever that might be, but use that data to really communicate, because people do understand that, whether it's visually, whether it's audio, however you want to present it. But that's a really, really interesting way for most people to understand your journey and the positive impact you're having. And then just be authentic. When you communicate, be transparent, be authentic, be honest. Say if something hasn't quite worked, there's nothing wrong with that. You're on a journey. Don't put yourself up on a pedestal. People do that enough as it is, don't they? So don't put yourself up there to be shot down. Make sure you're just talking about the plans you have in place, the progress you want to achieve, the data and the evidence you're going to collate for that. And then as you achieve that, communicate that with pride and with joy, and use this like really positive, really good marketing stories, because, the world has plenty of bad stories. We actually love some good stories, don't we? So definitely use it for that. So on that note, I think I really only have one other thing to say, apart from thank you to everyone who listens to the podcast and watches the podcast on YouTube. You know where you can find me. The notes will be at the end of this podcast episode anyway. But really, I do think the future is definitely going to be assessed not just on financials, but also on social impact and sustainable business practice. However you want to embrace that, just take some steps forward. Hopefully I've given you some tips on how you can start your journey if you're not already there. If you are already in that space and you need a little bit of guidance or some help in, progressing that along the way, please get in touch and let's see what we can talk about. Other than that, have a great day, and please keep listening and sharing the podcast. It's been what I consider a great success so far, and I'm excited for season 3. So hang on in there. Please keep supporting it. Please keep sharing it. Let's kind of walk this path together and just make the world a little bit more responsible. I'll see you in season 3. You've been listening to the Responsible Marketing Podcast. You can contact me with any questions or comments by email at joe@jolonconsulting.com or find me on LinkedIn. All recordings of the podcast can be found on the usual podcast channels, as well as on YouTube if you prefer to watch rather than just listen. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe, which helps the podcast to be found by more people. And of course, feel free to share it on your socials, with your friends and your colleagues. That's it for now. So until next time, Thanks for listening.